Good evening, fans of audio horror stories. Welcome to the Mr. Jaws channel. If this is your first time watching the channel, join our world for more horror stories. I live in a small but lively town in Massachusetts. Its local legends have fueled my love affair with the paranormal. It's a subject that fascinates me to this day. Coupled with insomnia, this passion led me to spend many a night at the nearby cemetery, hoping to see a ghostly apparition while walking through to pass the time. These outings were unfruitful, void of all activity, supernatural or otherwise. My dream of stealing a glimpse at what comes after eventually subsided, but I continued to visit the graves. It was a place where I could collect my thoughts when sleep eluded me. One night, however, something changed. It was a dark spring evening. I was bored, couldn't sleep, and felt the need to do something outdoors in the cool night air. As it so often did, the local graveyard called out to me. I obliged, unable to resist the allure of its calming nature. Sometimes I was even tempted to set up camp there and sleep amongst the dead. Knowing this would be frowned upon, and perhaps morbid, I settled for my walks. They were enough to make me at least somewhat weary by night's end. After a couple of hours there, I decided on one last stroll along the headstones in an attempt to become tired before heading home. Upon starting my walk, I noticed something. There was a light on in the groundskeeper's shack. It wasn't like him to be working so late. This wasn't completely out of the ordinary until you factored in the large gaping hole nearby, big enough for several caskets. It was a miracle I hadn't fallen into it earlier in the night. Curious as to what the old man was up to, I crept over to the shack, making my way to the busted window on its side. What I saw was strange. Inside were 9 men wearing tattered blue shrouds, partaking in a makeshift feast. The main course was an oily red stew with a horrific smell that permeated the shack's walls and ventured up my nasal passages, tempting me to gag. The men winced when putting it to their lips, save for 3. A tall man at the end of the table, and the 2 sat beside him. When the feast was over, this tall figure stood up and addressed the room. "Hello, newcomers. I hope dinner has been to your liking." He spoke with a firm voice. It resonated throughout the shack and beckoned even me to listen. "Now that our bellies are full, Elijah will explain the rules of your impending trial." I listened closely. It seemed the men in the shack were part of a collective known as the Bloodlights. The trial the tall man spoke of was something akin to a medieval gladiator sport used to initiate new members. I listened on as Elijah divulged the game's inner workings, fearful but curious. 2 teams were to disperse to opposite sides of the cemetery, each consisting of 4 members, 3 blood runners and 1 blood baron. The initiates would be the runners, and the tall man's henchmen would act as barons. There was one more participant to be discussed, the tall man himself. He was the blood keeper. Though not on either team, he was the most crucial facet of the game. He kept and guarded what was referred to as the blood. I gathered that this referred to the red amulet hanging from the keeper's neck, as he firmly clasped it every time the word blood was uttered. The job of the runners was to retrieve the blood from the keeper. The barons acted as counsel, overseeing each team and helping where needed. After Elijah finished his lecture, the blood keeper took over. "With every wound, there is blood. With every drop of blood, there is solace. Without death, there can be no light." The keeper opened a large cupboard in the corner of the shack, revealing a woman, bound and gagged, futilely attempting to cry out for help. My heart sank. This was not your normal, run-of-the-mill cult ritual. I had to find help, but what if they heard me? Unable to nail down my next course of action, I was immobile, frozen in fear. The bloodkeeper continued. The light of blood can only be seen in death. Pulling a large red dagger out from his cloak, he grabbed the woman and plunged it into her gut. I watched in horror as the life left her eyes. She began to shriek, but was soon cut off by a cut to the chest, followed by a final blow to her neck. I was mortified. After throwing his kill to the floor, the keeper pulled out 3 vials, filling each of them with the blood that dripped from his blade. This was the blood the runners were after, not the amulet. This is all the blood I have to offer. That gives, at most, 3 of you the opportunity to become bloodlights. And remember, you are being watched. Those who fail to collect must be disposed of. The same goes for any outsider you encounter. Corpses are to be thrown in the pit. Dear God, I was truly in danger. That's what the nearby hole was for, the perfect hiding spot for a mass grave. You must stop at nothing to obtain one of these vials. All others will be sacrificed. Your thirst for blood must be as strong as your will to live. The men exited the shack to begin the trial. I scurried silently to the wooded part of the graveyard and hid behind a large tree, not wanting to end up like that poor woman. I just needed an opening to escape without being noticed. Glancing out at the cemetery, I saw a runner knelt before a grave, eyes closed. I assumed this was a requirement before the game commenced, a perfect chance for me to make a run for it. Let the trial begin, the Bloodkeeper's voice echoed through the trees before I could take even a single step toward safety. My survival still hung in the balance. Using a moonlit pool of water by my feet as a reflective surface, I watched as Elijah and 3 runners strategized just 10 yards from my position. My heart was pounding so hard, I was worried they would hear it. Between the beating in my chest and the conspiring whispers that filled the forest, my ears were consumed with an unsettling symphony of torture. Just when I couldn't bear another moment, silence cut through the brisk night air like the keeper's dagger piercing that woman's skin. A chill then burrowed into my spine. The puddle's reflection bore no cloaked figures. Peering out from behind the tree confirmed that they were gone, or at least nowhere to be seen. This was my chance. Looking off into the distance, I saw a tomb by the main road, maybe 100 yards away. It would provide the perfect cover to escape toward civilization, but there was no way I could waltz over there without being seen. The woods wrapped around the cemetery, so running from tree to tree would strengthen my odds of survival. I took a deep breath and braced myself. Without so much as a second thought, I dashed to the next tree on the path to safety and took cover. I then gathered my wits and surveyed my surroundings. No cloaks in sight. I sprinted to the next tree and took another glimpse out at the world. The coast was still clear. As I was about to take off in the direction of my next hiding spot, panic set in as my feet inexplicably left solid ground. My blood ran cold as I was lifted into the air by some unseen force. The next thing I knew, my body was hoisted up and placed atop a tree branch. There, I was greeted by the unnerving sight of my captor, a blood runner. I didn't scream or try to get away. It would be no use. I sat there in terror and exhaled what I thought would be my last breath. Instead of gutting me, the man spoke. "What's your name?" I was too shocked to respond. "Come on now, who are you?" He spoke clearer this time, revealing a slight English accent. "Look, I noticed you at the window over there, eavesdropping. If I wanted you dead, I could have killed you then. I want you to help me." "Help? You?" I asked. "Yes. I'm going to use you to my advantage. I take it you know what we're doing here, and you know the rules of the game?" I nodded slowly, still shook. "Good. With you, I may be able to turn the tables and get the upper hand." I was frightened, but I calmed down enough to focus on the runner's plan. See that tomb over there? That's where the Bloodkeeper is. My stomach turned. To think, This guy may have just saved my life. I need you to go over to the tomb and open the door, slowly. The Bloodkeeper will surely take a swing at you. Just as he's about to end your life, I'll swoop in and end his." "But why?" I asked. "That's not part of the game." "Right you are. You need not concern yourself with the why. Just know that if you don't do as I say, I will kill you myself. Now get going." The man gave me his cloak for protection and pushed me out of the tree. I didn't want to risk facing the Bloodkeeper, but I didn't want to perish at the runner's hands either. My fear of dying kept me from deviating. I again ran from tree to tree, eventually making it to my destination, the stench of bloodshed wafting through the air as runners fought for control of the field. With my back pressed to the cold, aged stone, the pull to escape grew. The main road was within reach, but the thought quickly subsided. I was far too worried the Englishman would catch up with me and take his price. He was able to climb a tree and lift my weight into it without a sound. It was clear he possessed the agility and stealth needed to take me by surprise during a haphazard run for the hills. I sighed in defeat, knowing that one way or another, I would probably die that night. Mustering up every bit of courage I had left, I crept around the tomb and faced its door. My shaking hands reached for the rusted handle and pulled it towards me. Before its hinges could even creak at the motion, the door burst open, pushed from within. The force knocked me over, my head connecting with the unforgiving ground. The moments that came after remain fuzzy. The Bloodkeeper towered over me, half of his body in shadow, the other soaked in moonlight. A vision of death there to steal the blood from my racing heart. My eyes grew weary and shut for an instant before opening to see another figure. I couldn't make out who was who in my dazed state, but one attacked the other, completely overpowering them. The prey in this scuffle fell to his knees before landing face first into the cold cemetery soil. The familiar sound of metal colliding with flesh rang through the air as the victor saw to it that the job was done. I prayed it was the Bloodkeeper being torn apart. Otherwise, I was a goner. My eyes shut again before unconsciousness finally took hold. "Hey, are you all right?" I heard an old man's voice as I came to. "Are you okay?" I opened my eyes to see who it was. The groundskeeper stood over me, holding a lantern to my face. "What? How? Where are they?" "Where's who?" he asked. "You don't understand. I should be dead." The groundskeeper stared at me, confused, but then smiled. "Come on, you'll catch cold out here." The groundskeeper, who I now know to be Petey, invited me into his shack. He prepared some food and tossed me a blanket to keep warm. Thankful and in need of an ear to fill, I told him everything, despite how I knew it would sound. I didn't describe the men by their given titles, but Pete seemed to know who I was talking about. "Sounds like you had a run-in with the Bloodkeeper." "That's him. How did you know?" "His spirit has been visiting these grounds for over 100 years now, I suppose." His spirit? Incredible. It was all a haunting, something I always thought I wanted to experience firsthand. Pete and I talked for a long while. He knew all about the Bloodlights and their dastardly deeds. Apparently, they were a sadistic cult that formed in the 1800s, terrorizing the local community. Each Bloodlight initiation brought with it more disappearances. They used the cemetery as a space for their trails, burying casualties and sacrifices at the end of every night. After all, who would look for the bodies in a graveyard? Over 50 souls fell victim to the Bloodlights before their sinister games were brought to a halt. During their last outing, an Englishman infiltrated their ranks and killed the Bloodkeeper, avenging the death of his wife who had been murdered during one of their trials. Soon after, his disciples came forward, claiming to have been controlled by the Keeper's amulet, alleging that it had supernatural powers. No such amulet was ever recovered. After Pete explained everything, I sat in awe, dumbstruck by the whole ordeal. Had I relived that fateful night? Or did I time travel and help that man fulfill his goal? I may never know what happened that day, but one thing is certain. I will never visit another cemetery for as long as I live, just in case the ghost of the Bloodkeeper is still out there, making his rounds. I'm 29, and I live along the Appalachian Range in lower West Virginia. I've been going backpacking and camping for years, exploring different trails all around the nearby mountains. My best friend, who lives just a few miles from me, would often join me on these hikes. We usually planned one big trail every year in the fall, being anywhere from a few days to a whole week of backpacking and camping. In 2019, we planned to take a trail across the range to a small lake at the top of the mountains. In the days leading up to the trip, though, my friend had to call it off because of an emergency at his work. I'd already taken the whole week off of work and had everything ready to go, so I decided to just go alone. On Monday morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead, then started my route. This wasn't a regular recreational trail like you typically see on a 4-hour hike. These backpacking trails didn't have defined paths, so you have to use maps, compasses, and landmarks to navigate where you're going. Typically, there's a large landmark in the distance, like a specific rock formation that you hike toward. And when you get there, you could see your next landmark and so on. I spent the first 2 days hiking toward a ridge in the mountains. When it got dark on the second day, I set up camp several hours from reaching the ridge. I pitched the tent and got a fire going, then heated up some of the food I brought in my bag. The sun had already set, and it was around 8 o'clock when I laid in my tent to rest and read. I left the fire going, planning to put it out before actually sleeping. 20 minutes into reading, and through the fire crackling outside, I heard the strong sound of a stick snapping right behind my tent. I jolted up. My first thought was a black bear, possibly having smelled the food I cooked earlier. I didn't hear anything else, though. I crawled out of the tent and shined a flashlight into the tree line behind my tent. Nothing. I called out aggressively to scare away any predators, but again, there were no sounds of anything running away. It was really strange because the stick snapping was very distinct, definitely being from something stepping on it. I stayed outside the tent for a while, looking around constantly before putting out the fire and going inside. I found it really hard to sleep that night because I was so focused on listening for more sounds. In the morning, I was almost surprised to have even slept through the night. I packed my tent and everything else at the campsite, then continued along until I reached the ridge. From there, it was a straight shot to the lake. I was moving fast, trying to get there before dark so I wouldn't have to move my campsite again the next day. I arrived with about an hour to spare before sunset. The lake was beautiful, very much worth the hike. I walked around it, enjoying the scenery, then pitched the tent and set up my camp on the tree line beside the lake. As I sat by the fire, I kept turning around, hearing soft noises somewhere between the trees behind me. I figured I was just being paranoid, but it was really creepy. It almost sounded exactly like footsteps, but I knew nobody would be out here. I would have seen their tent when I walked around the lake. It was too dark at this point to see anything further than a few feet, so looking around wasn't an option anymore. An hour later, I got in my tent and laid down. Every few minutes, I would hear footsteps again. They were barely too quiet for me to tell for sure what they were, though. Eventually, I got so tired that I fell asleep. What I think was only an hour after I fell asleep, I woke up to the sound of someone running away from my tent. I jolted up and grabbed my flashlight, rushing out of the tent and looking in the direction of the footsteps. I saw the bare back of them running away in the distance. My heart was beating rapidly. I looked down and saw footprints all around my tent, like they had been walking around me and searching the campsite. I tried to get the campfire going again as fast as I could so I could see better. I was terrified. I had nowhere to go and nobody to help me. I sat at the fire all night, keeping my head on a swivel, but I never saw or heard anything else. I snapped a few pictures of the lake, then started the hike back. I had planned to stay for a whole day. I wasn't comfortable anymore, feeling like I was being followed. I was able to make it back without any more trouble, thankfully. But along my journey, I began noticing several things missing from my backpack. Small things like food, a few tools, etc. But I always had my bag with me. Even today, I wonder if whoever had been outside my tent that one night had actually snuck inside and stole from my bag while I was asleep. Even the thought of it makes my whole body shiver. Every year as a kid, my family would go on these big camping trips. I was always really excited because we lived in Arizona where there's pretty much nothing and we'd camp in Washington. Seeing trees and grass was my favorite part, but I also got to see all my cousins, and even though we only saw each other a couple times a year, we were really close. My favorite cousin, who was more like a brother to me, was Luis. He was a year older than me, and we were inseparable when together. Because of what happened, we became even closer after that camping trip. I think it took us both a while to understand what really went on and what more could have happened to us. It started when we had been there for 2 days already. Most of our family was either in the lake or by the campfire talking. Luis didn't like to swim, so we decided to play in the woods instead. We played a version of tag called Bandit. We'd switch off being the cop and chase the other one who was the bandit until we'd catch them. We would play for hours, but in the woods, it's easy to just keep running and not know where you're going. We tried our best to stay within viewing distance, but when Luis started chasing me with a huge stick, I guess my adrenaline kicked in the hyperspeed. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually I ended up at an old-looking trailer. Luis wasn't far behind, but I remember him throwing the stick down, his focus now on what we both assumed was an abandoned trailer. We discussed investigating it further, and I'm not really sure why, but we decided not to. We started walking back, but we didn't really know where we were going. Probably about 10 minutes into our walk, we saw a couple coming towards us, pushing a shopping cart full of stuff. The woman approaches us and is really nice, while the man stayed back. She asked if we were lost, who we were with, our names and ages, and I remember when we told her how old we were. She looked back at the guy, and then to us again. She told us we don't have to be scared, and she'll help us find our way home after they drop off their stuff at their campsite. She said we could also make s'mores if we wanted. Luis and I were hesitant, but she seemed really nice, and it was still daytime. So, for some reason, that made everything way less suspicious. In my 7-year-old brain, bad people only do things at night, so we were fine. We walked with them for a while, following them back to their camp. While her and Luis were talking, I glanced over at the shopping cart. It was filled with a bunch of rusty metal things, in what looked like to be nothing new. Nothing was in bags. Everything just looked like trash they'd found somewhere. I started to get really uncomfortable, and I could tell Luis was too. Every time I'd look over at the guy, he was never smiling, and sometimes he'd be staring at me with a blank stare. This was 18 years ago, and I still remember how creepy he looked. We walked a bit further until the trailer came back into view, and the woman grabbed Luis and mine's hands and asked if we were excited for s'mores. Suddenly, I heard Luis's name being called, and then mine. We all stopped for a second, and the lady squeezed my hand a bit tighter. She asked something to the guy along the lines of what they should do. He responded, but I don't remember what he said. The lady started to turn us toward the trailer while holding us tighter and tighter. She started to speed up as well into sort of a fast walk. I looked back and saw my sister through the trees. Without hesitation, I yelled her name, and the lady immediately let go of my hand. Luis and I ran to her as she made her way towards us. My sister yelled to the others that she'd found us. My mom and dad thanked the couple who had told them this elaborate story on how they've been trying to find our parents for a while now, and that we're such sweet boys and everything. I remember my parents inviting the couple over for burgers, but thankfully they declined. I think because the lady was so nice and that we were found safe that my parents didn't think twice. I do recall my dad and uncle talking about how creepy the guy was, though. My cousin and I ended up telling my sister who found us that the couple was weird, but I don't think she understood what we meant. It wasn't until my cousin and I were old enough to understand that some people have really bad intentions, we talked about it again in depth, and we both came to the conclusion that by the looks of it, they were tied on money and were probably going to sell us or something. For years growing up, I had kept this from my parents because I was supposed to be the strong man of the family, and thinking about that time made me feel gross and preyed upon. Luis also felt embarrassed as he was older than me, and felt he had failed to protect me. We eventually told our parents a few years ago, but I wish we had told them immediately, and maybe something could have been done. Nowadays, I never let my kids out of my sight, and always let them know that they can tell me anything without fear of being judged, especially my son. It is told that one day there was a tall apple tree with branches full of fruit, strong trunk and branches. Beside the tree, there was a child playing and frolicking, climbing its branches, eating its fruit, and when he got tired of playing, he would sleep under it, sheltered by its shade and large branches. This happened daily. Days went by, and the child grew up and became too busy to visit the tree. However, one day he returned to the tree, feeling sad. The tree asked him to play with her, and the boy said, "I am no longer a child, and I need some money to buy some things." The tree said, "I don't have any money, but take the apples from my branches, sell them, and use the profits to buy what you need." The boy gathered all her fruit, took them happily, and left without returning. The tree became sad. Note: the translation might not capture the full essence of the story, as some cultural nuances and emotions may be lost in translation. Years later, the child returned. As usual, the tree said to him, "Come and play with me." The child replied, "I have grown into a grown man now. I have a family to take care of, and I need to build a house. Can you help me?" The tree replied, "I don't have a house, but you can take as many branches as you need to build your own house." The man did so, took the branches, and left happily. Days and years passed, and the tree was left alone, saddened by the man who had grown up and no longer visited. Then, one hot summer day, the man came back to the tree. The tree was delighted to see him and invited him to play. The man said, "I have grown old, and I want to rest from the hardships of life. I want to live a period of relaxation. I want to sail far away from people, but I don't have a boat to sail with." The tree said, "Take from my trunk and make a boat." The man took from her trunk and made a boat, and he sailed away, not returning for many years. After all those years, the man returned to the tree. The tree had grown accustomed to his visits, so she spoke first, saying, "I'm sorry, but I have grown very old, and I don't have anything to give you." The man replied, "I have no need for apples to eat or sell. I don't have teeth to bite them." The tree continued, "I don't have a trunk for you to play and climb on." The man said, "I have no need for that. I have become an old man, and I can't do those things anymore." The tree became very sad because she had nothing to offer. She felt almost dead. Her roots had become weak. The old man responded, saying, "All I need and want now is a place to rest. I just need a place to find some peace." The tree said, "These are my roots, and they are all that remains of me. You can sit and find some rest beside me. Sit and relax here as you please." The wisdom extracted from the story is that genuine and mutual relationships between people are built on giving and sacrifice. In the story, the tree symbolizes generosity and unconditional giving, as it continuously provides for the child's needs and desires. However, as the child grows older, he becomes more self-centered and takes advantage of the tree's resources without reciprocating. The tree's ultimate happiness comes from offering a place of rest and solace to the old man, highlighting the importance of selfless acts of kindness and finding fulfillment in giving without expecting anything in return. When I was 21, I made the poor decision to move out of my parents' house before I could afford a place on my own. It was something I'd actually planned out for months, searching for cheap apartments, roommates, and anything that could help me move out. For some reason, I just prioritized moving out on my own over everything else. After months of searching, I found a post on Facebook about a room for rent in my area. It was a 2-bedroom house, and the owner was renting out the second bedroom. I sent him a message on Facebook and got a reply in minutes. He asked a couple of questions, then sent over a document. It looked like a huge list of rules for moving in, all simple stuff that's pretty much common sense. After agreeing to all the rules, he let me come over to look at the room that same day. When I got there, I was very surprised at how clean and well put together the place was. It looked like it was a model house, so perfectly decorated and furnished. The owner, Terry, was a little bit weird, though. He was in his late 20s, but his personality and looks didn't match the way the house looked. He was wearing a dirty t-shirt and just had a weird way of talking. Still, I was blinded by the possibility of moving out that I didn't even care. A week later, I packed up a rental van with my stuff and drove it down to the house. When I walked inside, I almost thought I'd walked into the wrong house. It was so empty, no decorations or furniture, except for an old couch in the living room. It was a completely different-looking place than the one I'd seen the first time. Terry was standing there and acted like nothing was different, talking my ear off about how excited he was to have a roommate. I asked about all the furniture and everything, but he basically ignored my question and just went straight to moving my stuff into the house. Being a little weirded out, I still moved in. Several weeks went by, and to be honest, I rarely even saw Terry. He was always working and didn't get home until late at night, but about a month in, I started realizing that Terry had stopped coming home most nights. It was maybe once a week I'd hear him get home around 2 or 3 a.m. He'd hang around downstairs for a while, then leave and wouldn't show up for another week or so. Part of me didn't care because I was happy to have the house to myself, but another part of me was curious about what he was up to. I mean, he wanted me to move in so bad, but now he's never here. Then one night at 2 a.m., weeks since I'd last seen Terry, I was woken up to him banging on my bedroom door and yelling my name. I got up and rushed over. Terry was standing in the doorway with sweat dripping from his head and a look of anger. "Do not leave your room," he said in a harsh voice. Then grabbed the door and ripped the handle out of my hands, slamming it shut. I stood there in shock, listening to him walk downstairs. I opened the door quietly, and after a few seconds, I heard the sound of him dragging something heavy across the floor and into the garage. I ran downstairs to see what was going on. There was a smear of mud and dirt going across the kitchen and leading up to the garage door. I tried to open it, but he'd somehow locked it from inside. I realized it was best to just remove myself from the situation and ran out to my car, driving away while calling the cops. When they got to the house, Terry was already gone, and the smears on the floor had been cleaned up. After some days of investigating, it turned out that Terry was actually renting the house from someone else, so I wasn't even allowed to have legally moved in, and all the documents he sent me and had me sign were fake. Terry likely wasn't his real name either, and as far as I know, he never showed back up after that. I don't know for sure what he was up to, but he was so adamant about me staying in my room that night. And with him vanishing afterward, he clearly had something horrible he was hiding. But what really confuses me is why he wanted me to move into the house and live with him so badly. I can't help but think that he had some sort of plans for me, and I barely got out of there without having to find out the hard way. Three years ago, I moved down a few states on the East Coast to a new city. Due to work and money, I couldn't make the trip to see the place before making the move, but I was only renting, so there wasn't too much risk in it. It was mid-September when the movers came and loaded everything up, then dropped it off at the house. The landlord was nice enough to let the movers in for me to unload because I wasn't actually arriving there until the following week. It was a Monday evening when I finally arrived and saw the house in person for the first time. It was a mess with boxes everywhere and furniture laying all around, but the house itself was all right. The layout was interesting in that it was very separated. It was a single story, with the kitchen and living room on one side of the house. Then on the other side was a long hallway with all the bedrooms and bathrooms. Started working on getting the bed put together, then shut off all the lights and went to sleep. I didn't have a clock set up yet, so I don't know what time it was, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to an odd sound. I thought it was a noise the house was making, but I wanted to see what it was and if it was something I needed to let the landlord know about. I got up and walked over to the bedroom door. As I got closer, though, I realized it was coming from somewhere down the hallway. I opened the door and it stopped almost instantly. The hallway was pitch black, so I flicked on the light, but nothing was there. I slowly walked down and peered into the living room. It looked the same as it had earlier, but I turned on the lights and looked around just to be sure. On the floor, there were a lot of footprints scattered between the boxes that were laying around. I knew it was likely from the movers, and with no other signs of anything, I went back to the bedroom. It took a while for me to fall asleep again, because I kept thinking about how the sound stopped as soon as I opened the door. I tried to come up with any possible way this could be the house making noises, but nothing came to mind. When I drifted back asleep, it felt like I only stayed asleep for a minute before I was woken up by a sudden thump, followed by footsteps running down the hallway. My eyes shot open, and I looked over at my bedroom door. The door was wide open, and on the ground were clear footprints coming right up to my bed. I got up and hurried to see who was there, but by then they were long gone. All that was left were scuffed prints from them running away. I got my phone and called the police, locking myself in the bathroom until they arrived. When they did, they oddly found no signs of a break-in aside from the footprints. I convinced myself that they must have gained access during the week before I arrived at the house. But something still didn't sit right with me. After unpacking and checking each box, nothing seemed to be missing. It obviously makes me wonder what they were even doing in the house, but the biggest mystery is why did they walk up to my bed? And what was that thump sound that I heard just before they ran away? The landlord was eager to allow me to break the contract and move out, so long as I didn't say anything about the break-in publicly. At the time, it sounded like he just didn't want anyone to be scared away from the house, so that he wouldn't miss out on his rental income, but now I'm not so sure, so... My grandmother was a first-generation Chinese immigrant to the United States. Grandma always said I looked like my mom when she was my age, no matter what age I was. I always looked like Mom, apparently. Grandma died last year. She did well enough for herself, but my mom did even better, especially as a single parent raising my brother and me. She bought this house, a one-story space with a basement, perfect for the four of us. Grandma always watched us while my mom was at work. Grandma almost exclusively spoke Chinese. I was a bit of a brat. Once I realized that everyone at school only spoke English, I had little interest in keeping up my Mandarin. As a result, Grandma and I didn't always talk much. But I still remember her stories: Yisian, the Magic Lotus Lantern, Sun Wukong, and the Journey to the West. That one was particularly close to Grandma. I wondered if she ever wanted to return to China like the Monkey King. It was nice to be able to put Mandarin on a resume, although it may seem antithetical considering my degree is in English literature. I was the first in my family to graduate college at the ripe old age of 22. Upon graduating, I wanted nothing more than a break, so I moved back in with my mom and my brother. But now it seemed my break was going to be longer than I intended. There was less to do with an English degree than I anticipated. I was sending my resume and credentials left and right. I guess nobody wanted a little Asian Shakespeare and even frying their chicken. One night, I considered putting Smith as my last name on my resume, just as a little experiment. I was in the basement, watching a movie while emailing job applications on my laptop. I sent in my last round of credentials and checked the time. 1:02 a.m. I closed my laptop, tossing it gently on the couch cushion next to me. I reached to grab my phone off the charger. Turning its face to me, I found it was dead. I had forgotten the charger downstairs was broken. No sweat, I thought. I'll just sleep in my room tonight and charge it there. I turned off the TV. It was pitch black. Of course, I had navigated this basement thousands of times. Like clockwork, I made my way around the couch, down the short hall, up the 4 stairs to the landing, then turned left to go up the stairs past the landing. It was claustrophobic on the stairs. A wall to the left and right and a short ceiling above. The distance between the walls was only 2/3 of my wingspan. There was one wooden handrail on the right side. I placed my right hand along the smooth wood and my left hand in my pocket, with my phone that bounced with each step. As my hand glided against the rail, I angled it just the right way so that it would slide smoothly off the end of the railing. But to my surprise, the railing didn't end. This gave me pause. I stopped and looked over at the rail. It was too dark to see anything. Standing in place, I kept sliding my hand up, but the end wasn't within my reach. I swear I was sober. I wasn't on anything. I hadn't even ingested anything since dinner. So I figured I was just more tired than I realized. I kept walking up the stairs. After maybe 5 steps, I had to pause again, scanning the rail with my palm, but still no end. I started to go up the stairs at a faster pace. I heard my heels hit the wood under the carpet. I must have climbed the length of at least 2 of my staircases before I stopped again, catching my breath. Kneeling down on the step ahead, I waved my hands wildly in front of me, searching for the door at the top of the staircase, or the little strip of hardwood floor that slid under that door past the top step. As I looked up, I couldn't even see the outline of light that would have come from upstairs. Where was the moonlight? I pulled out my phone from my pocket. I tried to turn it on. I knew it was dead, but I also knew that the low battery icon would flash if I hit the power button. Once it flashed, I waved the light in front of me, but it barely shined on 3 inches of space ahead. It was no use. I shoved it back into my pocket. I must have been hallucinating. Turning around, I started heading back downstairs, my left hand on the rail, 1 foot after the other, calmly bouncing downstairs. I knew I'd arrive at the landing eventually. At some point, I realized I must have descended more stairs than I had escalated. I paused, and my breathing started to slowly spiral. I tried to get a grip on myself. But it was at this point I moved beyond rational thought. I clutched the handrail, worried it would disappear if I let go. At the same time, I wondered, maybe if I let go of the handrail, then I'd find the end of the stairs. I had to force myself to unhand it, but I did, and I went back up the stairs. my hands clenched into fists in my pockets. Walking and walking and walking, I was confident that each step would be the one to finally take me to the door out of there. I had to stop and take a deep breath. I turned and started jogging the other way. My calves were lightly burning. I figured if I was hallucinating this, I must have looked like a real idiot, running up and down the same 10 steps over and over. Eventually, I had to stop going down. It felt like I was hyperventilating. My knuckles must have been white in my pockets. A thought came to me. If I was close to the bottom of the stairs, then I could toss my phone in front of me. It would hit the wall at the landing. Surely the sound would wake me from this stupor. Taking my phone out of my pocket, my hand shook with nerves at my plan. I hit the power button so the low battery icon would flash again. Cocking my arm backward, I gave a swift toss. The screen was almost immediately enveloped in the darkness, and rather than hearing the phone bump into a wall, the sound rang rhythmically of the phone hitting step. Then step, then step, then step, until that sound too evaporated into the darkness. It sounded like it was still falling by the time I couldn't hear it anymore. My eyes were wide open, yet I still couldn't see a thing. After standing frozen for what must have been a full minute, I sat on the step behind me and brought my knees to my chest. My mind ran rampant with what to do next. Sleep. There was no way I could, with my heart beating this fast, try to make a hole in the wall. If this was just a hallucination, Mom certainly would not be happy about that in the morning. Try falling down the stairs? Possibly. Before I was able to even keep thinking, I began hearing what sounded like whispers. Most of it I couldn't quite make out. I wondered if it was another language. I thought I made out some words. Trip, fall, weak, useless. Suddenly, among the voices, I heard my name. May. I thought it was impossible for my heart to beat any faster, but I was wrong. I felt like it was about to beat up and out of my mouth. Some of the whispers sounded like laughs. Among the whispers came another voice, a very clear sentence in a language I understood too well. Why don't you try going up the stairs again? I stood up with a start and thought I heard something behind me. I turned quickly. For a moment, I thought I could see the figure of a man on a step above me. I nearly fell backward, but the outline disappeared almost as soon as I saw it. My mind must have been playing tricks on me in the dark. Despite being in the dark for what felt like minutes, my eyes simply would not adjust. It was still pure blackness. I reached out and the railing was still there, but that provided minimal comfort. I used my other hand to swipe in front of me, just to be sure there truly wasn't anything there. The words of my grandmother came to my mind as I stood petrified. She told us the story of Guidachang, the Guidachang. The name roughly translated to ghosts building walls. It's a phenomenon where all seems normal to a wanderer, but slowly, the wanderer starts to circle back to where they started, and nothing can stop them from doing so repeatedly. It's as if a ghost is building walls to keep the wanderer in a single space. As a kid, I always wondered, why would the Guidachang do something like that to a poor wanderer? As I got older, the answer became clearer and clearer to me. When given the power, resources, and opportunity to torture someone, any creature will. I tried to remember everything Grandma had ever said about the Guidachang. Don't look over your shoulder. It was too late for that. I had turned around multiple times at this point. Look between your legs. The space is a window into the demon's world. I honestly considered this, but I was far too afraid of what I might see if I went through with it. What happened if I never got off these stairs? Would my mom and brother find my corpse here on these steps? Did I even still exist, or had I vanished from my own dimension? Would I ever see my friends or family again, hear them again, touch them again? Ultimately, I decided I would slide down the stairs. I thought about falling down, but I figured I'd break a bone, if not die. I could get on my back and slide down as if it were a water slide. It would be uncomfortable, but eventually I would hit the landing, right? I assumed the position, crossing my arms as I lay down on the steps. I took a deep breath, ready to send myself down. But just as I was about to shove off, I heard something, lurching. It hit the left wall, then the right. Soon, I could hear it breathing. It was heavy, heavy breathing. Whatever it was much bigger than me. A bear? No, it must have been bigger. I could hear it coming up the steps. It was definitely walking on two legs, despite how heavy it sounded. As it took its steps, I heard something else. Clanking. The clanking of metal, like armor or chains. I slowly sat up as the footsteps continued. At a rhythmic pace, the footsteps started getting faster. I slowly and clumsily scrambled to my feet, and I started sprinting up the stairs. I was running and running and running. I could feel my hair blowing behind me. The steps behind me kept getting faster in their own time. I didn't know how long I was running, but I was sweating and wheezing, and my muscles were on fire. Eventually, I started scrambling on all fours up the stairs like some kind of ape. I collapsed on the steps. I clutched the carpeted stairs between my fingers as I sobbed, not ready to face the hands and teeth of whatever was pursuing me. In an instant, past the sobs, I heard the words in a whisper, "Inside out," and I remembered my grandmother's words. When trapped by a gui da jiang, you turn your clothes inside out. As the breathing down the steps grew even heavier, I frantically dragged my shirt off my body, turned it inside out, and pulled it back on. I closed my eyes tightly. The footsteps sounded like cannon fire before stopping right next to me, and the creature's breath glossed over my cheek. Through my eyelids, black turned to red. The breathing on my face disappeared. My own breathing was normal again. The cheeks that were a moment ago tear-stained were now dry. My muscles felt relaxed. There was no trace of sweat on my forehead. I opened my eyes slowly. I saw the banister on the wall across from the one I leaned against. I looked up and to my left. There, my brother stood at the open door atop the stairs, hand on the light switch, groggily asking, "Are you okay?" I foolishly looked back down where I saw my phone laying in the center of the landing. But I didn't go back for it. I ran up just 5 steps and hugged my little brother around his neck. He was surprised. "What time is it?" I begged to know. He showed me his watch, which read 1:03 a.m., just 1 minute after I'd left the couch. I scurried to my room. Though I was unsettled, I felt exhausted, and I managed to get to sleep quickly. The next morning, I turned on all the lights in the house and grabbed a little flashlight out of the hallway closet just to be safe. I ran downstairs, snatched my phone and laptop, then ran back up. I didn't hang out in the basement so much after that. I sat at the kitchen table waiting for my bread in the toaster. I opened my laptop. There was a new email from an employer. Before I got the chance to open it, my brother came in and sat across from me, preparing some cereal. I suddenly became curious and asked him, "Why did you come to the basement door last night anyway?" Something woke me up. For a few minutes I heard really loud stomping coming from the stairs. This happened a couple years back when I was 26. My single mother had just passed away, and being the only child, their house was left for me to either sell or move into. I was living in a really nasty apartment because I couldn't afford much back then, and after much deliberation, I decided to move into the house. It was already paid off, so I was saving a considerable amount of money by moving in. My goal was to hopefully save up for a few years and get back on my feet, then sell it and buy the house that I wanted. Once my lease was up at the apartment, I moved across town to the house. It was part of a community of farmland owners, but in the recent years, Most of that land had stopped being used for farming and was left as just empty fields. That's what happened with my mom's land as well. It was pretty much just an old barn-style home in the middle of a huge field with only a small, overgrown path leading to it. In the first week living there, I spent most of my time cleaning and getting all of my stuff where I wanted it. During one of these nights while I was cleaning, I heard a car coming toward the house. I looked out the window and saw an old pickup truck driving down the overgrown path. It was very strange, being that the only reason for them driving here would be if they were coming to the house. But just as they approached the end of the path, they slowed to a stop. I could make out a male figure in the driver's seat, but couldn't make out any specifics. They stayed there for a moment, with their headlights shining over the field, before they did a 3-point turn and drove away. I thought they probably just typed in the wrong address or something, but it was kind of creepy to see someone coming all the way out here so late in the night. A few days went by, and by then I'd finished getting the house cleaned up and organized. It was a Sunday night, and I was staying up late watching TV and eating a home-cooked meal when a familiar sound came up in the distance. A car driving toward the house. I looked out the window again and saw that same pickup truck coming down the path, this time with all its headlights off. Knowing it couldn't possibly be an accident this time, I was more worried. I quickly looked at my phone and saw it was nearly 1 a.m. So why would anyone be coming here? The truck came all the way to the front of the house and parked. Then a man got out and started walking up to the porch. I waited anxiously, but after a minute there was no doorbell or knocking. I cautiously went up to the front door and looked out the peephole. A man was standing right on the porch, looking directly at the door. I was terrified, as he looked like he was contemplating something. Then he turned around and went back to his truck, getting in and hurrying away. I was really creeped out, so I called the police and reported it, but there was nothing else to be done. I went to bed that night with a really bad feeling about everything. Apparently, I was right, because I woke up to what I thought was the sound of a knock at the door. It was just a single knock. I got up right away and looked out the window, but the truck that I thought I'd see wasn't anywhere outside the house. I quietly left my bedroom to try and go downstairs and see who it was. But just as I reached the top of the steps, I could see that the front door was slightly open. I froze, and moments later, I heard footsteps walking through the hallway below me. I quickly hid in the spare bedroom that was next to me and dialed 911 as the footsteps grew louder and started coming up the stairs. They went straight into the main bedroom, and I could hear them moving stuff around, like they were looking for something. I was too scared to speak to the officer on the phone, worried the intruder would hear me, so I just sat there silently. They spent a few minutes going through the bedroom before leaving and going back downstairs, and finally exiting the house. I started talking to the officer as I ran up to the back window to see if I could identify them before they got away. It was dark, but I could see that it was the same man who was on my porch earlier. He was walking in the backyard toward the field of tall grass, eventually disappearing in it. Police came by and tried to find any evidence to help with the case, but my description of the man was about all there was that was helpful. I don't know what that man wanted, but he seemed to be looking for something specific. It makes me think maybe he knew of something my mother had, and after hearing of her passing, he wanted to steal it. But once I realized he had to have known I was home and probably in the bedroom, it terrified me to think about how he still went in and looked around. What was he planning to do to me if I was still in there? I ended up selling the house a month later because I was too scared of him coming back. I still check every few months to see if there were any reports of recent break-ins at that address, but it's been quiet ever since that night. I was really happy with my wife for more than 10 years, and we lived in New York all that time. But before that, we first met at a work meeting. and after a few months, we started going out. We both worked for the same company that sells and advertises things, but in different parts of the company and different offices. After a year of dating, we moved in together. Then, a year later, we both got better jobs and earned more money. Because of this, we were able to buy a house and start paying for a mortgage just 6 months later. Another year passed, and then we decided to get married. 4 years later, we moved house and bought a bigger property with a pool and large yard. We both agreed from the start of our relationship that we didn't want children and that we both wanted to concentrate on our careers. So, in our minds, having kids would have affected those plans significantly. We both enjoyed our jet-set lifestyle of flying off to different countries for work and also holidays. We made sure to have at least 2 vacations in foreign places every year. Overall, we had a good life. But one day, when I was in Florida for work, promoting stuff for a big company, something happened that changed my life a lot. I'd been at the convention for 2 days. There was food included at the lunchtime intervals, and everything seemed to be going well until some of the delegates of the 3rd day started becoming unwell. And also, the main speakers had been affected. At the end of the 3rd day, the convention center manager made an announcement. He said that the convention was going to have to be canceled, as there seemed to be a sickness bug circulating through the delegates and speakers. So, for the benefit of all the concerned, it has been decided to close the center. The government control has been advised of the situation and closure. Sample taking and then the center deep clean will be carried out. I immediately left the center after speaking to my team. I told them to go back to the hotel to take a shower and change all their clothes and put the dirty clothes in bags and wash on a hot wash. Then, when they got home, I told them to try and minimize any contamination and that they should just isolate. Luckily, it seemed that none of my team had been infected, but I knew delegates who had been, and both had the doctor called because they were so rough. I said to my team to head home on the next available flight. When I got back to my hotel, I showered and bagged my clothes and got changed. I then tried ringing my wife, but it went to voicemail right away. I called her office and her assistant picked up. She said that Rachel had taken this week off as a holiday. Strange, I thought. She never mentioned to me when I set off for this convention that she was going on holiday. I decided not to leave a message on her phone and just caught the next flight back, which was the following morning. I picked up the car from the airport parking lot and set off, as there were no delays on the way, so I was home in virtually no time as planned. As I drove up my drive, I saw a black Audi car parked by the front door. On the other side was Rachel's red Jag. I parked alongside and got out and stared at the Audi. From what I could remember, we didn't know anyone with that car. I opened the door and walked inside. There were clothes on the floor, some belonging to Rachel and a man's jacket. I rushed up the stairs to our bedroom and opened the door. Then I saw Rachel in bed with a stranger. She screamed, and the guy got out of bed, grabbing his pants and apologizing. But I went to the bed, grabbed him by the neck, and took him to the bedroom door. I threw him out, and he left in his car with screeching tires. I looked at Rachel and told her, "Why did you ruin everything like this?" She begged me, but I thought the marriage was done. 3 months later, we got divorced. We sold the house and split the money. I quit my job at the old company because I wanted to leave New York and have nothing to do with Rachel. I used my connections to get a job in Virginia. I bought a smaller house with 3 bedrooms. It had a smaller pool and yard, but the last house was big enough for 2 people. The agent told me the owner wanted to sell quickly, so I made an offer. The seller accepted my first bid, which was great, because I wanted to leave the hotel where I'd been living for the last 3 weeks. Then I arranged for my things to be moved from New York, and 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m., I got the keys. The moving trucks showed up, and by 3 p.m., they were gone. I sat in Box City in the living room, looking out at the trees in the backyard. At 5 p.m., I had a coffee by the pool. The water was green and needed cleaning, so I knew I had to get someone to do that. But it was a shame because I wanted to swim that evening. I was tired after the day, so I had a microwave TV dinner and a couple of glasses of red wine. I dozed off on the sofa and woke up, startled out of my rest. I looked around the room feeling confused, trying to figure out what woke me up. Then I saw the backyard security light had turned on. I got up from the chair and went to the big window. The light brightened up everything, from the lawn to the trees at the back. The pool's water was shining in the lights, but hang on a minute, it was showing a rippling effect, as if someone or something was in there. I stared, but the angle was not right to see better. Maybe an animal has walked into the garden, I thought, and set off the light and then perhaps fallen in the pool. I decided to go and check. I opened the patio doors and went outside. As I got closer, I saw small puddles of water on the pool's edge. But when I looked into the pool, the water was calm again, just moving a bit in the night breeze. I looked all around, but there was no sign of any animals, but it still didn't explain the puddles by the pool edge. Maybe it got out, I thought. I started to go back inside. I locked up and went upstairs to bed. I don't know how long I had been asleep before my bed started shaking. What the heck? I looked around, but no one was there. I frantically searched the room and turned on the bedside light. Then I heard a splash from the backyard. The pool, I thought. Once more, I jumped out of bed and went to the window. The security light turned on again. This time, from the high view, I could see a small head of someone swimming in my pool. Some neighbor's kid doing it for a truth or dare, I thought. So I put on my clothes and rushed down the stairs. I opened the doors again and ran across the lawn to the pool. I looked at both ends. The water was choppy, like something had been there, but there was no sign of anyone. Then I noticed the small puddles by the pool edge, but this time they left a puddle track. I followed the wet trail from the pool to the grass at the back of the yard. Then the wet tracks just disappeared. None of this made any sense. I turned to go back to the house when I heard a scratching sound. I turned around but couldn't see where the sound was coming from. It stopped, then started again, louder this time. Suddenly I realized it was coming from the well at the back of the property. I ran over to the well, but the cover was nailed down. Then the sound came again. This time, I thought I heard a very faint voice saying, "Please." I tried grabbing the wooden cover on top of the well. I tried to move it, but it wouldn't budge. I hurried to the garage, grabbed a crowbar and a flashlight, and came back. The scratching sound was getting more intense. I put the crowbar on one side, pushed down hard, and the wood broke, flying off into 2 pieces. Then suddenly, a terrible smell hit me when the top came off. I turned away for a moment, and when I looked back, I saw the underneath part of the well cover had hundreds of deep scratches. I got a chill. What happened here? Who or what got down or was stuck here? I turned back to the well and shone my flashlight down. It was really deep, but my light showed what looked like an old teddy bear. I saw some clothes and something white in the water below. As I stood there, I suddenly felt something next to me on my right side. Then a small hand grabbed my left hand, but it was gone in a second before I could react. I shone the flashlight everywhere but saw nothing. I walked back to the house, feeling confused, and called the cops, telling them I think there might be a body in my well. They sent a team, and by 10 a.m. the next morning, they confirmed there was the remains of a child. They brought it up and they thought it was the body of a girl, maybe around 11 years old. The police finished looking into things. Then, few days later, they told me the people who owned the house before had been foster parents. They took care of a little girl for 2 years, but she disappeared one night, according to the foster dad. It seemed like she might have been taken, but the police couldn't find her. The foster parents were questioned many times. but they never found any proof, so the case stayed unsolved. However, 4 months after the girl went missing, both parents were found dead in their bedroom from an overdose. But the only evidence they found was the little girl's skull, and it had a crack on the left side. So the cops thought something bad happened with her, and they believed the girl's body was put down the well. Sadly, during her disappearance, the file said the well was sealed, so it wasn't checked. The police officer asked me, "Why did you go to the well in the middle of the night?" I thought for a moment. How could I answer without sounding crazy? So I said, "I don't really know. Let's just say I had this strange feeling something wasn't right about it." He raised his eyebrow and said, "Okay, we'll leave it then." After that, nothing strange happened at the house, but I left the well open. When I was very young, something really scary happened. There was a gun in the back of my parents' truck, and it accidentally went off. So the bullet went through my mom's wrist and then through my left foot. But luckily, I still have my foot, and I was okay. Now let's jump ahead 34 years to March 2018. I was dealing with a really bad ear infection and couldn't sleep because my head hurts so much. On other end, my fiancé Steve, who works in construction, takes sleeping pills to help him sleep. One Thursday night we went to bed because Steve had to wake up early for work on Friday. I was finally getting better from the ear infection, so this night I was sleeping really deeply for the first time in days. But I woke up to a noise. At first, I thought Steve was just getting up for the bathroom or something. So I went back to sleep. But then I heard shouting. I was still half asleep and not really thinking. A few minutes later, I heard more shouting. I jumped out of bed and stood up in the dark. Then I realized it was Steve yelling. I was confused and thought maybe the police were in our house or something. But the first words my brain actually understood were, "Give me the money." I was like, "Wait, what? The police don't shout that. What's happening?" Steve is completely naked, running at these attackers, and then he slams our bedroom door, trying to stop them from getting to where I am. These guys are trying to force the door open, and Steve keeps slamming it shut. Suddenly, I start hearing loud noises. These guys are actually shooting at us. I see Steve moving around the room like Spider-Man, trying not to get hit by a bullet, but also keeping our door closed so they can't reach me. I hear Steve yelling, "Get the gun, get the gun." And I'm wondering, how would I go after these intruders and try to get their gun? As I mentioned, I was sleeping really hard and my brain was not working well. Finally, I realized Steve is talking about getting our gun. Yeah, I'm not very smart, so I turn on the light, grab our gun, and give it to Steve. But the intruders, who are really terrible people, have already run out the same way they came in, through the back door. Later, it turns out, our not-so-smart roommate didn't lock the back door. Anyway, I'm shaking, and almost hysterical now. But Steve got grazed by 2 of the 6 bullets that were shot at us. I spent a whole month taking care of his wounds and helping him get better. We also got a dog and installed a home security system. Sometimes I still put a chair under the doorknob at night. And I haven't had a good night's sleep in about 2 years. Most nights, Steve would have slept through anything because of his meds, and I would have woken up to the danger. But by some miracle, he heard them first. He protected me and himself like a true hero. He was supposed to be in Florida until the next week, but came home early. I shudder to think about what those 2 armed robbers might have done to a sleeping deeply and not knowing they were there until it was too late. Sometimes I feel like I'm cursed, or that the people who love me the most always end up taking a bullet for me. First, my mom went through it, and now my fiancé has too. It really scares me to think that anyone close to me goes through these gunshot situations just because they're close to me. To those terrible intruders who broke into my house and took away my feeling of safety, I really hope karma gets you. I've always loved camping, especially in the fall when the leaves are changing colors and the air is crisp. So when my best friend, who I'll call Katie, asked me to go camping with her for her birthday, I jumped at the chance. We packed up our gear and headed out to a secluded spot in the woods that Katie's family had been camping at for years. As we hiked in, I felt a sense of silence. In a good way, though, it was like we were the only two people in the world. The hike was relatively short, and when we arrived at the campsite, we both started working on setting everything up. This only took a portion of the hour, and after we finished, we decided to go for a hike. We went pretty much straight north, off the beaten path, just exploring, until we came across a faded trail. And said there was nothing out here, so she was confused. We followed the trail that wound through the woods and eventually led us to what looked like an old, abandoned cabin. It was small and weather-beaten, with broken windows and a sagging roof. Katie was eager to explore it, and I was a bit hesitant, but also really curious. We stepped inside. It was clear that no one had been there for years. We poked around for a while, looking for any interesting artifacts or clues about who had lived there, but we didn't find anything. As we were about to leave, I noticed something strange. There was a door in the corner of the cabin that I hadn't noticed before. It was very small and had a padlock on it. I pointed it out to Katie, and we both became curious. The lock looked really old, completely rusted all over. I knocked on the door, knowing nobody would be inside, but I just wanted to make sure. Katie went outside and grabbed a large rock, handing it to me. I smashed it against the lock, only taking a few good hits until it broke open. The door dragged against the ground as we pulled it back. Inside it was pitch black and we couldn't see anything. Katie pointed her flashlight through the doorway and there was a staircase leading down. We both were creeped out now, but we assured ourselves that nobody has been here for years and there really wasn't anything realistic to fear. Led the way down the steep staircase. It wasn't very long, only 8 to 10 steps, before it opened into a room. What we saw was very disturbing and strange. There were several small mattresses on the ground along with some other random furniture. They looked very modern though, like the mattresses had to be within 5 years old. Something about it just hit me with fear, and both of us rushed upstairs. We pushed the door shut again and stood there, unsure of what we just saw. We debated whether or not it was a crime scene of some sort because it all just looked so out of place. As I was talking, Katie suddenly shushed me. In the distance, footsteps were coming toward the cabin. They came all the way up to it, but oddly, they walked right past it without stopping. I could see confusion on Katie's face too. As soon as they were far away, we ran back to our campsite, then right back to Katie's place. We called the police, just in case it was something to us. The fact that the person kept walking without even stopping meant that they were familiar with the cabin. We didn't know if it was due to something bad or not, so we decided to let the police decide. They searched the cabin and the area around it, but ultimately found nothing leading to anything. They said it was really strange and even seemed like it had to be something bad, but there just wasn't anything justifying that. It ended up becoming a big thing in our town for a while, having the community talk about every possibility and theory of what the cabin was used for. The city even had the cabin torn down because they didn't want people visiting it. It still has never been figured out, and it probably never will. But there's just something in me that knows something awful happened there.